Imagine standing just a stone's throw away from the world's most secretive country, North Korea. From October 8 to 17, 2023, NK News invites you on a unique journey, the second ever North Korea from a Distance tour. Our experts, including NK News founder and CEO Chado Carroll and Cordial Tours manager Gergo Vachi, will take you on a riveting expedition along the inter-Korean border. See the stunning Kumgang mountain range from the east coast and scour the beaches of Yeonpyeong Island, only 7 miles away from North Korea, for items from the DPRK. In Ganghwa, observe North Korean villages from close quarters. Should conditions permit, we'll even journey to the iconic Joint Security Area and the fascinating Chorwon County. You'll also have 2 thrilling days in Seoul, visiting key museums, political sites, and meeting the NK News team. Throughout the week, you'll be accompanied by leading experts and staff of NK News, including Andrei Lankov, Chado Carroll, Jacko Zwetsloot, Jongmin Kim, and a multitude of others. Not only will you hear them brief on topics of their expertise, but you'll get the chance to really get to know them over dinner and drinks at multiple occasions along the way. Quote podcast for an exclusive 10% discount when you book. Visit nknews.org/tour for more information. Once again, quote podcast when you visit nknews.org/tour. Get ready for the journey of a lifetime. Hello, podcast listeners. Welcome to the NK News podcast. This is your host, Jacko Zwetsloot, and today it is Tuesday, the 26th of September, 2023, and I'm actually on vacation over here in sunny Europe. So I'm phoning back to the head office to talk to Alannah Hill, the Deputy Managing Editor, to talk about what's been happening while I've been away. Hello, Alannah.
Hi, Jacko, and I'm calling from a very grey, dreary, rainy Seoul, so I feel like I'm back at home in Ireland. I'm jealous of your sunny European holiday.
Yeah. Now, the first thing that every journalist wants to ask while they're on vacation away from Korea is, has there been a major death in the North Korean leadership?
No major deaths to report of, Jacko. You can sit back in your chair and relax for now.
Okay, all right, I'm relaxing. So I was very sad to hear that Seoul was going to have a military parade to maybe rival the Pyongyang one that they had recently. While I was on holiday, I missed it all. Tell me what I missed.
So, yeah, basically you're not missing that much, it seems. It seems like the rain has put a bit of a dampener on things. The parade actually hasn't taken place yet through central Seoul, but we've been eagerly looking out the windows and seeing people starting to line up, and they're closing off roads. This morning there was a parade at Seoul Airport, and President Yoon Sokeel was there. He gave a speech. We saw a couple of interesting things, a very cool Taekwondo performance. But again, any of the Air Force flybys, they were all cancelled because of the rain. So it wasn't as exciting, I think, as we'd hoped.
I don't understand. Why does rain stop a flyby? Is that because the audiences won't be there to look up and gaze admiringly on the planes? Or is it a technical issue with the planes themselves?
Jacko, you're asking the wrong person, because I had the exact same question. And I'm also a bit concerned that should we need some kind of Air Force support and it's raining, are we on our own, or what happens?
Dear. Well, okay, now looking at the NK News website, as I did immediately upon waking up this morning, just like every morning, I was very curious to see this story there by Collins Wirko, our intrepid reporter, about the fact that Chinese state media is reporting that foreigners can now enter North Korea after a 2-day quarantine.
Really interesting story. Yeah, so a little bit confusing. We're not super clear on it, because basically all these reports are coming from an article from CCTV, which is Chinese state media. And it's a 1-sentence article. So if I may, I'll read that sentence. Please. And it says that North Korea announced that from September 25th, which was yesterday, foreigners can enter the country in accordance with regulations, and that they must undergo medical quarantine for a period of 2 days after entering. So basically, all the reports that we're hearing on this are based on this 1 sentence. It's from a journalist who typically covers DPRK state media, but it doesn't really cite where he's got that information. But an expert that Colin did speak to said because it's coming from the state broadcaster, it appears to be authoritative. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I think, you can look at it a few ways. Is the news here the fact that the quarantine has now changed from 7 days, which it previously was, down to 2 days? Are tourists going to be allowed back in? Is that what it means? Does it just mean,
Wow, but which tourist would sign up
long-term?
for a 2-day quarantine?
Yeah, exactly. Or is it just, for people, North Koreans who've been stuck overseas, or sorry, not North Koreans, obviously, for foreign diplomats maybe who are
Yeah.
wanting to come back? So yeah, it's not super clear yet, but it'll be interesting to see coming days and weeks what really happens.
Exactly. I predict that if this Chinese state media story is accurate, that we can expect within, let's be generous, within 72 hours, there should be something out of North Korean media that confirms it.
We'll have to keep an eye out for that for sure.
That's what I would expect, yeah. Now, of course, I've been wondering, as I'm sure many of our readers and listeners have, what have been the developments on the North Korea-Russia front since the big podcast that we did last week with Andre and Anton talking about Kim Jong Un's visit to the Far East to meet with Vladimir Putin. So what's been happening on the Russia front?
Well, Kim arrived home safely and, on his train again. Anton Sokeel, who I know was on the podcast with you recently, has written a fantastic wrap up, basically, of some of the things that we might have missed. So I really encourage listeners to have a look at that. It's titled Fur Hats and Limo Talks, and kind of gives us a look behind the scenes of some of the things that maybe we not so much missed, but maybe weren't as focused on, including some of the fantastic gifts that Kim Jong Un received during this trip, ranging from things, as I said, like a fur hat, which very interestingly, they had to do some serious research about how to make sure this hat would fit Kim's head. And of course, they can't simply ask the leader of North Korea, how big is your head? So apparently they had to use photos of him and the Russian ambassador to the DPRK and kind of compare their head sizes and make a hat based on that. But if listeners have a look at that article, I'll link it in the show notes. There's some great pictures of Kim in his hat.
It is a good long article. It looks like it'll be ideal breakfast reading for me this morning.
Exactly. Yeah. Or Jacko, you can just skip through and look at the pictures,
Well, and there are some good pictures. I'm very impressed with upon arrival, Kim Jong Un welcomed in Komsomolsk on Amur with bread and salt. Is that something traditional they do there, bread and salt?
Apparently it is, yes. That's what Anton said. That's a traditional greeting. And also, interestingly enough, was he quite happily ate the bread with no concerns of, where it came from or who baked it, or clearly he's not gluten intolerant.
Right. Now, I wonder which of these gifts will end up in the House of the International Friendship Exhibition up there in the Myohyang Mountains, the two giant above ground and below ground buildings that hold all the presents that Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il ever received. Have they already started a separate exhibition for things that Kim Jong-un got? I think so. I recall in 2019 seeing some items, including the basketball that Dennis Rodman brought. And so perhaps they'll have the hat with ear flaps. I've forgotten what it's called, maybe a matrushka, and the bread and the salt may soon appear in that museum.
Well, there's those. There's also, he was gifted a glove from a spacesuit that Russian cosmonauts wore to space. That was one of the coolest ones, I think. And then there's also a picture of him receiving this, I suppose you'd call it a statuette, maybe a desk decoration from a Russian official of a fish head with another fish statue coming out of it. It's a really fantastic picture. Very interesting president. And it's a very interesting present, excuse me. There's also an interpreter.
There's no precedent for a president like that.
Yeah, looking on kind of in disbelief. So.
Wow, I've got to find that fish photo. I should explain to our listeners, there are actually multiple pictures available at each place in the article, so you've got to click through sometimes to get to the right one.
Yes, we made galleries. There was too much to choose from. We couldn't narrow it down.
Right. Now, is this still, a major topic of analysis and conversation in the Seoul-based media?
Yeah, I think that people are still talking about it, but I think, of course, it'll be interesting to see what comes in the next few weeks. Colin also recently wrote about some activity happening at Sohae Spaceport in North Korea. So one of the things that was discussed between Kim and Putin during that trip to Russia was potentially, Russia helping North Korea launch a satellite into space, spy satellite.
Right. After the two failures earlier this year.
Yes, and after that second failure, state media reported that there'll be a third launch in October. So based on Colin's research, he's seeing that there is still activity happening at that spaceport. So it'll be interesting to see, does North Korea go ahead and attempt a third launch without the help of Russia, or when that help will come, if it will come. So definitely we're keeping an eye out for those kind of things too.
Yes, I mean, if you're offered a free ride, and space rides do get to be quite expensive, then you wouldn't refuse it. I certainly wouldn't.
Of course not. No, that's a good deal.
Yeah, wow, okay. And what else has been on your radar the last couple of days?
So yesterday we had a very interesting story about this famous North Korean ferry. It's called the Mangyongbong 92. And one of our reporters actually found from some satellite imagery, from some ship tracking data, that this ferry is on the move again, and it's up near Russia. It's in North Korea's closest port to Russia, which is Ranjin. Yeah, so basically this famous ferry, it hasn't moved much since 2018 and is now kind of on the go again. So kind of raises questions about maybe cargo transfer, maybe people transfer.
Right.
So another thing that we're keeping our eye out on.
This is the ferry, the Mangyongbong ferry that used to go between North Korea and Japan all the time to take ethnic Koreans on trips to North Korea and also take goods back from Japanese Koreans, the Zainichi.
That's correct, yeah. And then it was quite famous for transporting a really large delegation of North Koreans to the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics back in 2018.
Yes. So it did, right. Okay, so it's a very, as you say, it's a famous and important ship, and now it's made a trip to the Far East. So yes, we will soon hopefully learn more about that and see if it becomes perhaps a regular ferry trip, since it's been banned from going to Japan since 2006, and certainly no sign that it'll be coming to South Korea anytime soon.
Right, yeah, I think that's safe to say.
Wow, it's been around, I forgot the age of the thing, but it's been around for decades. It is a long ship. It's 126 meters long.
Yes, it is a large ship.
You can carry, and a lot of people.
Exactly, maybe both.
Yeah, wow, okay, great. And one last story to leave us with today.
Well, I like to finish on another fun one, if I may, Jacko.
Oh, yes.
We had a really great piece from our intern, Joe, at the beginning of last week about some of the fashion items that this North Korean delegation to Russia were sporting, in particular, some very, very, very expensive handbags, as seen by, the North Korean leader's sister, Kim Jong Un. She had a Dior handbag that was estimated to be around $7,000, while Foreign Minister Cho Sung-hee had a Gucci handbag, apparently made from ostrich leather, that we found for sale on a second-hand website for $10,000.
Second-hand, so imagine what it could be if it was new.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so she's stuck. Maybe she'll throw it up on a second-hand website herself.
Ostrich leather, golly.
Yeah.
Yes, I've just dug up that article now. Our listeners can find it. It's called North Korea's Foreign Minister Totes 10,000K Ostrich Leather Gucci Bag in Russia. And I also see Hyun Sung-wol, very prominent North Korean woman in the leadership class, up there also with a handbag. Do we know anything about that one?
So poor Hyun Sung-wol apparently didn't get the same clothing and accessories budget. Our research trying to find that bag, it showed up on a Chinese website basically, and it can be purchased for about $8. So much different price point there.
Gee, and she's arguably much more front and center than Kim Jong Un is quite often these international meetings.
Yeah, it looks like all the budget went on the ostrich leather, and then she just got whatever was left, maybe.
Oh dear, I do recall that when she came down for the sort of preliminary group to prepare for the Pyeongchang Olympics in 2018, she had an expensive handbag back then. So it's not all bad. It swings and roundabouts, I suppose.
Right, yeah.
Okay, well, I thank you for bringing me up to speed, Alannah, on all the latest news around North Korea. I hope that the weather stays lovely and Irish for you there so you can feel at home.
I hope that doesn't happen, Jacko.
And I will be calling in with Brian Betts next week to find out what's happening while I'm away, because I've still got one more week of vacation to go. So thanks for coming on the show and helping me to record this in my morning. I'm going to go out and have a lovely Dutch day.
Enjoy, Jacko. Thank you.
Thank you, Alannah. Attention North Korea portfolio professionals. Are you in need of more than just sloppy and spotty South Korean news coverage on the DPRK? If so, I present to you NK Pro. Born from the established news gathering reputation of NK News, NK Pro leverages staff experience and top-notch technology to provide subscribers with superior knowledge and tools to achieve their goals. Expect daily analysis, exclusive tools, and a suite of research tools that cover everything from North Korean state media to the whereabouts of DPRK vessels and aircraft. How cool is that? In a world where the landscape of North Korea seems unknowable to many, NK Pro cuts through the noise and provides you with the quality, reliability, and timeliness you need. Stay ahead, stay informed, and master the landscape with NK Pro. Trust me, it's a game changer. Interested? Visit nknews.org/professionals to claim your free 30-day trial of NK Pro. Once again, that's nknews.org/professionals. Joining me via Zoom today for NK News Podcast's long interview is Sokeel Park, South Korea Country Director for international non-profit organization Link, for which he was made a member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, MBE, in 2019. You can find Link online at Liberty in North Korea, all one word, .org, and Sokeel Park on Twitter at SOKEEL. Sokeel, welcome back on the show. Sokeel Park MBE. Do I address you as member Sokeel or is just Sokeel MBE enough?
Just Sir is fine.
Sir, all right.
No, Sokeel is fine. Just Sokeel, obviously.
You were last on the podcast in August 2018 on episode 32, quite a while ago. And on that episode, you and I talked about change within North Korea being driven by the 25 million North Koreans who are not named Kim Jong Un, with the people taking it upon themselves to improve their lives and their country. And we're going to talk a bit more about that today, but also all the wonderful work that Link does. So for new listeners who maybe weren't already fans of the NK News podcast 5 years ago, can you tell us what Link is? What does the name mean? What does the group do? And how long have you been there?
Can't believe that's been 5 years already, Jacko.
Yeah.
That has flown by. But so I've been working for Link for a bit more than 10 years, but I feel like I've been saying that for a couple of years, so it's probably 12 years by now. And Liberty in North Korea is an international NGO with offices in the United States and here in South Korea, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And we are comprised of staff from North Korea, from South Korea, Korean diaspora, if you like me, and also, non-Korean foreigners, of course, especially in the States. And we work on North Korea in 4 main areas, and I guess that you might have questions on these, so I won't go into details, but we help North Korean refugees to reach freedom and safety in the first place.
Yeah.
And then we work with North Korean refugees who have resettled in South Korea or the United States to provide resettlement assistance and longer-term capacity building. Thirdly, we work to develop content and technologies to provide North Korean people with more access to information, something that, a lot of North Korean refugees or defectors themselves advocate for.
You mean trying to give more information to people while they're still in North Korea?
Yeah,
okay.
While they're still in North Korea. It could be North Koreans who are outside of North Korea, but still within the North Korean system as well. We're still working for the North Korean government.
Right.
And then lastly, we work to try and change perceptions on North Korea by working with North Korean refugees again to amplify their voices, stories, and perspectives to bring more focus to the North Korean people and to balance, this, what I see as a massive over-focus on the politics and security, Kim Jong Un and nuclear weapons and so on. So that's the main areas that we work in.
Okay, so Liberty in North Korea. Some people might think from the name that you're after regime change in North Korea. Is that part of the vision of Link?
Not necessarily. The vision of our organization is literally our name. It's Liberty in North Korea. It's North Korean people achieving their freedoms and rights that, a lot of people around the world and probably a lot of people listening to this podcast might sometimes take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's different possible pathways to that. Regime change is obviously a kind of hot button word, so we don't necessarily talk about or focus on that. But the important thing is the conditions that North Korean people live in.
Broadly speaking, what has changed about Link's work in the last 5 years since you were last on the show?
I think that there have been significant changes and also, things that have remained consistent. Of course, the COVID pandemic was a massive disruption to a lot of our operations. And we're still kind of recovering from that, especially that was a huge disruption to our refugee work. People familiar with the numbers will know that the numbers were already decreasing.
Yeah.
It was already becoming more difficult to, escape from North Korea, and most of the people are coming all the way through China into Southeast Asia and then coming into South Korea. And that's a very long journey that goes through multiple borders. And it was already becoming more difficult because of increased security, especially on the North Korea-China border and in China itself. But in the last year before the pandemic, 2019, just over 1,000 North Korean refugees made it to South Korea. But in the last 2 years, so 2021 and 2022, that was only around 63, 67 people making it here. So the numbers have just fallen off a cliff. And that, of course, affected our workers a lot because we're working, in that field to bring people through. But then it affects kind of the whole pipeline as well, right? Because there aren't North Korean refugees then who are resettling in South Korea coming out of, the South Korean government processing through the National Intelligence Service and then Panawan, the South Korean government's resettlement education facility. And so, the supply, if you like, of North Korean refugees in their early resettlement has really dried up. And so we've had to pivot from that in-person events in South Korea, the United States, especially maybe in South Korea for a longer time, were affected as well. And so our kind of outreach and engagement work had to pivot to online, like the same as NK News and NK Pro and pretty much everybody. But we're kind of getting back into it. I don't think that there's going to be a getting back to the 2019 normal. Especially in terms of the refugee work.
Is that because it's much harder to cross the border from North Korea?
Yes, it's much, much harder to escape from inside North Korea. But even, Chinese surveillance and control over movement and these kind of things have increased and not recovered. Of course, since the end of last year, China stopped its so-called kind of zero COVID policy that made it almost impossible for North Korean refugees. It made it difficult enough for ordinary Chinese people to move across the country.
Right.
And for North Korean refugees who can't show real ID and get the tests and the vaccine in order to be able to show the, health QR codes and so on, it became basically impossible. But there's a legacy of how much that was disrupted. And the increase in, kind of surveillance capacity that the Chinese government has. And that, again, predates the pandemic even. This was a trend that had an inflection point and acceleration, if you like, with the pandemic.
I wonder, Sokeel, if the pandemic also affected funding from donors as well.
Thankfully, we were not affected massively by that overall. In fact, we were very thankful that it seemed that even when a lot of people around the world were hurting financially during the pandemic, people still prioritized funding us. And like, for instance, in the United States, there was a time when people were getting, I don't know exactly what they were called, but kind of, government pandemic bailout checks.
Right.
And it was like a specific number of dollars, right? Like, for instance, if it was $480, we all of a sudden saw this spike of donations of exactly $480.
Wow.
And so people who were receiving that, who maybe felt like they could survive without this, but they wanted to help people that maybe couldn't. We saw that kind of pass through. So yeah, very, very thankful, of course, for that.
You kindly sent me a link to your 2022 annual report, which listeners can download from libertyinnorthkorea.org if they want to. It's compared to many annual reports that I've seen, it's a much more attractive one, lots of short, snappy figures and quotes and attractive visuals. So it was an easy read. I've got some stats from your report that I'm going to read at you, and then I'm going to try something different. Just say a few words about each of them, like super brief, because I'm going to ask some more things in detail afterwards. Okay, so some stats from last year. 5 rescued.
Yeah, so this was more at the end of last year. A couple of people went to the United States, and 3 people managed to come through China with the easing of restrictions there. So we were very thankful for that resumption.
Okay, far too long. All right. 230 plus refugees supported in resettlement.
That includes in the United States and in South Korea through our various programs.
$4,145,144 raised.
Again, even with the pandemic and with a lot of disruption in both our programs and our fundraising work, very thankful to still be able to maintain the organization and keep things ticking.
That's great. 194 people empowered through links programs.
So we might get into this a little bit more, but this is including our English language education programs, scholarship programs, mentorship, and so on, again, across South Korea and the United States.
Great. 5 Link Labs projects.
I can't talk that much about specifics there, but again, that is the work to try and increase North Korean people's access to information. That's an area of our work that we call labs.
And lastly, 13,172,952 people reached with the stories of the North Korean people.
Yeah, this is a really important part of our work, I think, again, trying to amplify North Korean people's voices so that the world doesn't just mostly hear about Kim Jong Un and nuclear weapons. We can build more support for North Korean people.
Right, and that's certainly very timely right now. I mean, this week, all that the news is talking about is a possible meeting that may take place in the coming weeks between Kim Jong Un and Vladimir Putin. So it is important, of course, to remember that there are lives of 25 million other people in North Korea who are not named Kim Jong Un. All right, so let's talk about some of your programs in a bit more detail. Let's start with refugee rescue and resettlement support. First of all, just about the latter part, resettlement support. Don't refugees from North Korea get help with housing and resettlement from the South Korean government?
Yes, they do. And in fact, especially here in South Korea, there's a significant amount of assistance, especially if you compare it to other refugee assistance programs around the world by governments. And this is because the South Korean government has a very different approach to North Korean refugees than other refugee populations.
Yeah. In a CNN report earlier this year, you commented about the 3 months of mandatory resettlement training that refugees receive at the Hanwon facility that you mentioned earlier. You said, quote, "This approach is outdated, ineffective, and overly restrictive." Can you say more about that?
Yeah, this comes from partly conversations with North Koreans who have gone through that process, and also just my own assessment. Jacko, me and you both also moved to this country, and we had to learn how to operate in the society. And we did that by just living here and by getting the bus in the wrong direction and making mistakes and probably offending people and so on. I don't think that a government program of 3 months in a facility, kind of locked away out in the countryside would have been the best way for us to learn those lessons. And so that's the overall logic. And it's also in the case of North Korean refugees in particular, it's people a lot of the time, people in their 20s who have risked their lives for freedom. And so there's an uneasy irony that when people arrive here, actually the first 6 months of their life in this society have little access to those freedoms that they risk their lives for. A lot of people accept it. Some people don't. And I think that that sentiment that maybe it's not the right thing should be amplified and should be empowered, because overall, I don't think it's efficient.
I'm curious, what you said just makes me wonder whether the National Human Rights Commission has ever said anything about this, or whether if anyone's ever, or if Link, perhaps on behalf of refugees, has ever leveled a petition or a complaint at the Human Rights Commission about the restriction of freedoms.
I'm not aware of that. I am aware of, different efforts, including for myself. If I have the opportunity to talk with relevant people, then I will raise this, and I think it's a complaint which is known to relevant institutions, but there's not been enough of that going in to actually make a change.
Right. Now, 2 of the refugees that Link helped to resettle last year ended up, as you said, in the United States. What are some reasons why a North Korean might choose to go to the United States, which, after all, is the country they've been told all their lives as the enemy, rather than South Korea, where they look the same and speak the same language?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And I think it's very individual as well. A lot of people have different reasons for that. But Some of the people, maybe some of the commonality is an uneasiness with resettling in South Korea, not, having a complete trust maybe of their security in South Korea, in the sense that either the South Korean government or pro-North Korea elements, even spies, agents, and so on in South Korea might be a risk. And some of that, I think, might be justified sometimes, and sometimes people who are coming from a very different information and cultural background. But like you said, it is kind of interesting that some people would then choose to go to the United States, which has been framed so strongly as the enemy.
Right.
But I think that in some conversations that actually can backfire with some North Koreans who, again, these are the people who are willing to risk their lives to defect to the other side, to escape, to reach freedom. And sometimes the fact that America has loomed so large in their lives as this kind of cultural idea, I think actually makes people interested. And people, if they get over the idea that it's an enemy or maybe it's not an enemy, then they might see it as a big, powerful country that it might be a good idea to kind of restart your life in such a country, as opposed to South Korea, which is so close to North Korea and maybe more risky in some ways.
Are you able to say any general things about the difficulties or challenges of resettlement in South Korea versus in the US? Is one harder or easier than the other?
I guess it's apples and oranges. The challenges are very different. In the United States, what you could say for it, positive side, is that there's not so much baggage of being a North Korean refugee in the United States. If you're in the United States, then people aren't picking up on a different accent. Basically, people are seeing an East Asian immigrant who maybe doesn't speak English that well, but Americans are very used to that. And so there's not so much a kind of, strong label or, questions about somebody's background or identity and so on. So it's a little bit more kind of clean slate.
Yeah.
But there's less support from the government. There's less support generally, from civil society. There is the language and more cultural barriers to overcome and so on. So there's pros and cons. And South Korea is kind of the reverse of that, right? I think that a lot of the challenges that people face are because of the way that some South Koreans might react to their identity and prejudice and discrimination that people might face. But then, again, if people are able to get through that, then maybe they have a better chance of going to university with more support, and maybe they have a broader array of kind of professional options that they can pursue. And there's also, more of a community here, which again can be a plus and a minus. But I think that for a lot of people, if they're positive about that, then there's more of community, there's more North Koreans that they can build relationships with, and there's more support in general, specifically for North Korean refugees.
Well, let me pick up on that community aspect there. There have been some tragic cases in the last couple of years of North Korean women refugees who were found dead in their apartments after dying there alone, sometime before they were found. What can you say about community or support networks for North Korean refugees? Are they insufficient? Are there people falling through the cracks?
Unfortunately, I think that those cases show that there are. And there's also cases where sometimes some of these people may have been doing much better previously, but a lot of the time, people will come to a period of their lives where they face more challenges. Various things might have triggered that, including maybe even things that have happened back home to their families in North Korea. And if somebody is a newcomer to this society without immediate family here, they may have been able to build friendships, but they may not have the kind of the density of relationships and support that they can really turn to when they face difficulties. And that can be difficult enough for South Koreans and just anybody around the world. A lot of people struggle with mental health issues. North Korean refugees are maybe particularly vulnerable to some of those issues, and maybe there can be cases where it can be more difficult to get support. And that's definitely something that we think about. Your question before about the support that already exists from the government. They tend to be good at providing the kind of hard, tangible support in terms of housing and maybe assistance for health, some healthcare and education, but they can't really provide community or the more kind of psychosocial support.
And is that what Link tries to do?
That is one of the areas that we focus more on as well. I think it's difficult for anybody to build community for somebody. It's often a byproduct of other activities. If you think about the communities that most people may be a part of through school or through work or through, religious institution. And so it's difficult to just build community as a product in itself. But through regular meetings, through activities and so on, by providing people with opportunities to meet other North Koreans, meet South Koreans, maybe like-minded people, we'll do what we can. But it's also, just something which is very individual. And sadly, there are these cases, and there probably will continue to be some of those cases because there is a significant population at this point.
Just briefly, I know it's not our main topic, but since you mentioned it in passing, what are some of the ways that North Korean refugees can still remain in contact with and receive news from relatives back in North Korea?
Yeah, that's, I think, a really important issue that a lot of people may be less familiar with. And unfortunately, that's also become more difficult with the pandemic. But a lot of North Korean refugees have immediate family or relatives and even friends that they might be able to be in contact with in North Korea. And the basic system is that there are Chinese mobile phones. These days, there'll be smartphones loaded with various communication apps, of course, WeChat in particular, the Chinese all-purpose Kakao Talk or WhatsApp equivalent. And if they're in North Korea, but within range of the Chinese network, and people will hide these phones in mountains, go up mountains to be safer, and also try and get signal that's coming across the river, then they can use that just like they're in China. With the added risk of potentially being caught in North Korea, which would be very dangerous. And so people can send messages, they can send photographs of handwritten letters or voice messages, they can send photos of people, family even. This enables verification because that's an issue. There's all the time this is about sending money into the family in North Korea, and brokers may try and scam people if for a quick buck. And so, but if you can have a voice message of your mother, for instance, who may even not live near the border, they may live in the interior, but you may be able to use different devices to get a voice message out and then confirm just by knowing what your mom sounds like, and then be able to send money back in through those same networks. And there's actually a somewhat complicated kind of money transfer system that happens across the China North Korea border, and of course money from South Korea from the North Korean refugees are saving up is going into China first, and then it's being exchanged between brokers on the China and North Korea sides. And then that can be transferred within North Korea again, not just in the border region, but even in the interior. But with the border lockdowns and with the way that's affected smuggling and also other forms of trade, and also crackdowns on such brokers operating on the North Korean side, a lot of people sadly have lost touch with their family members in North Korea during the pandemic. And then other people may have only had limited contact, and also the money that they're sending back, the commission rates may be as much as half of the money is lost to the brokers because there's so few options to do that, and because the brokers themselves are taking on increasing risk, and so they need more of a cut to make it worth it for themselves. But just one more point on that. I think that even though it's become more difficult, it's still really important. We hope that, of course, it becomes a little bit less difficult, because this money, the equivalent of $1,000, $2,000 going into a North Korean family inside North Korea, is huge in terms of being able to provide for the family. But it goes beyond that as well, because sometimes we find that the people that are receiving this money will become micro lenders in their own area and loan money out to other families who may be trying to, start a business or increase the size of their business. So it essentially becomes kind of micro lending and startup capital for various entrepreneurial, market activities that's empowering economic change inside the country, And with that, there's also the information change of North Koreans inside the country, starting from the families, but also spreading into the communities, understanding that there are these North Korean defectors in South Korea who are doing so well there that they're able to send back what seems like huge amounts of money to these North Korean families. So that's a really important link, especially as so many other links have kind of dried up. And that's one of the things that makes it important to work with North Korean refugees to be more successful in arriving here and then be more successful in their new lives here as well, because it affects not just them as individuals, but the bigger picture of even the economic and information environment inside North Korea.
Okay, well, let's talk about another area then, moving on to empowering agents of change. How does Link actually work with resettled North Korean refugees to support their success and to build their capacity as agents of change so that they can do exactly as you say, to send money and information back to their families?
Yeah, so we have a few programs, like I mentioned, in South Korea and the US. Our two main programs currently in South Korea are our English language program and our Changemaker Scholarship program. And so for English language, maybe it's obvious to a lot of listeners, but English language is so important as a determinant of success in different ways in South Korea. It's probably the subject that South Korean students invest the most time and money into studying.
And why is that?
Why is it important in South Korea?
Yeah,
well, that's a good question. It's maybe more important than it should be, but it's important even in university in the course of studying non-directly English language related subjects like engineering or science. Students find that they need a level of English to understand a lot of the study materials, the lectures, these kind of things. So it factors into educational success. It can be a reason why some North Korean refugees drop out of university, for instance. And there is a higher dropout rate still for North Korean refugees than their South Korean peers. And then for getting jobs as well, again, it's a good question. It's probably more important than it should be. But a lot of companies will make a requirement on the, TOEIC, TOEFL, these standardized tests of English ability.
Yeah.
And beyond that as well, it is the lingua franca. It is, a language that opens up a lot of opportunities to communicating with not just Koreans, being able to travel abroad and going beyond the individual to the bigger picture. We still need more English-speaking people from North Korea who can share their stories and perspectives to global audiences. There's still a lack of that. And so it's one of the most consistent challenges that North Korean refugees tell us about that they need support with, especially conversational English. And thankfully, we have a network and relationships with a lot of people who can volunteer to teach English to North Korean refugees. And so we have a program where we'll match that up and we provide a curriculum. And there's been hundreds of North Korean refugees that have gone through that program already, actually, and thousands of hours of English language study since that program started in, I think, late 2021.
Now, what about your Changemaker Scholarship program? Tell us about that.
Yeah, this program was started because we saw a kind of gap in the scholarships provided to North Korean refugees. There are different scholarships provided by different foundations and so on, but as scholarships tend to be, they're focused on academic success. But with the work that we've done with a lot of young North Korean refugees here and university students, we find that a lot of the time there are young North Koreans living in South Korea who are attending university, so they have to study. And they're also, maybe here by themselves, or they're having to support their family. So they're working part-time jobs in convenience stores, restaurants, factories, and so on. And then they also want to contribute to this issue, whether it be by, sharing their stories, doing campus activism, working with NGOs like ourselves or the other great NGOs that are here in South Korea. But the financial constraint means that often that third thing has to be deprioritized because they have to spend time working and their remaining time goes on study. And so with this program, we're trying to identify people who have some kind of track record of activism They've proven that they want to participate. They want to, whether it be working on information projects or technology projects that can help people inside North Korea, or working to change the narrative on North Korea, or supporting other North Koreans in the community. There's various ways that North Koreans here play a really important role on this issue. And so if they have a heart to do that, then we want to support people who might otherwise have to spend 10 hours a week, even 20 hours a week in a convenience store, and not starting on that kind of activism.
Right.
So we've seen quite a lot of success with the first iteration of that program last year. And so we've just started again with the new class. And so we have 17 really interesting, mostly young, but there is diversity in the ages there. People doing all sorts of really interesting projects. And if we can fund them with, it's 500,000 won a month, so it's about $400. It's maybe not a ton of money, but that can make the difference for a lot of people in terms of just reducing their financial burden and freeing them up to be able to focus on this kind of great activism that they're doing.
Right.
In terms of North Korean refugees starting businesses or getting jobs here in South Korea, can you say a couple of words about what kinds of businesses North Koreans who do start business, what kinds of businesses they begin, and also what kind of jobs they do well at after going through education and resettlement?
That's a good question. I think that's a little bit difficult because, again, there's so much individual differences there.
Yeah.
But I know people that have started food businesses. Sometimes those are obviously lower startup costs. There's a guy that I know quite well who has a kind of web development business. There's a guy, Kim Jong Un, who is somewhat known in the community for, his role model is Steve Jobs. And he's, opened businesses repairing Apple products and, selling phones and that kind of stuff. There's people that run cleaning businesses. There's all sorts.
Yeah.
I guess, it's a little bit like the question of, well, what businesses do immigrants start? There's probably some companies, but it's pretty diverse. And then in terms of jobs, I guess there's age differences there, but maybe some of the older people eventually go for I think there's a trend of people going for jobs that are a little bit more individual, require less working in teams. And so, for instance, being a truck driver, for instance,
Right.
or maybe being a technician, for instance, the kind of people that might come and fix your air conditioning or these kind of things. Of course, there are people that are working all the way from, kind of construction type work to people that are working in well-paid IT jobs in South Korea, depending on the background that they have, the skills they are bringing with them or that they're able to develop here. And then for the younger people, it's so much more diverse because, some people are, may have come to South Korea when they were in their teens or in their 20s. And so they can go through the South Korean education system and then pretty much have the same kind of array of opportunities that South Koreans might have.
Now, what is that Links Advocacy Fellows program? How does that work?
So we select around 4, mostly, young North Korean refugees, and they might be at university, and they may be able to take some time out to, they may be based in South Korea or the United States, but the program mostly happens in the States. And we cultivate them as advocates, as the name suggests, work on public speaking, doing effective Q&A and, trying to drive home key messages and their calls to action. And then they practice real advocacy across the United States, visiting places like Google and, major companies and universities on the West Coast, going through the middle, going to New York, going through DC, engaging with the stakeholders on the government and political side. And this is, again, to try and balance the narrative and the viewpoints that people hear on North Korea. It's still the case that, especially in the United States, even more so, and around the world in English, people hear a lot about North Korea. And my missile expert friends I know won't hold it against me. for saying this, but people hear too much about North Korea from missile experts.
Yeah.
And not enough from North Korean people. And so that program is trying to address that. And we find that even in DC as well. There's so much interest, so much demand for being able to learn directly from North Korean people with lived experiences inside North Korea, trying to understand more about North Korea as a three-dimensional country, trying to understand North Korean refugee experiences and so on. So the demand is clearly there and it's still not being met. And so this is our attempt to try and meet that and trying to change people's perspectives so that ultimately we can bring more support. So we think that the US government should have a better policy on North Korea that can be more, kind of positive towards North Korean people and the changes that they're able to drive. So including, for instance, increasing the support for information access initiatives.
So some people listening today might be interested in seeing an advocacy fellows event, North Korean speakers. Can they find that out through the website if there's an event coming up near them?
Yeah, the easiest things is probably to follow our social media because we'll publicize those kind of events in advance. So all the main channels, Facebook, Instagram. I don't think we're on MySpace anymore. But
are you still on Twitter or X?
We're on Twitter and or X.
Yeah.
And I'd encourage people to sign up for our email newsletters as well, because we'll put information out on that. And yeah, I think the next iteration of that program will be starting kind of early next year.
Now, I want to also talk a little bit about accelerating change inside North Korea. How is Link innovating new ideas to empower North Korean people with access to outside information and technology? That seems quite difficult.
It is difficult, and it's especially in the deployment of that, it's become much more difficult with the border closures, with pandemic. Of course, we hope that there's some opening that's happening this year and some options might come back online. It's difficult, but I think it's really important. I can't stress enough how much North Koreans themselves emphasize this. North Koreans who have, again, escaped and then were able to share their perspectives on these things with us. It's by far the main, consistent thing that North Korean refugees ask for. That this is the way that we need to support North Koreans inside the country, help overcome the ideological dominance and information dominance that the North Korean government has. And a lot of the time that's, of course, coming from North Korean defectors having been impacted themselves so much by getting some access to foreign information. And then that, most of the time these days, being the main driver for them then risking their lives and escaping to the other side. And so then them seeing that, this had such a big impact on me. If we can get so much more information and media into North Korea, then it will really change things inside the country. And that North Korean people deserve access to different information so they can learn about learn and feel and hear about the bigger outside world and even their own country, truths about their own country that the North Korean government denies them. And so, unfortunately, this is a very risky area of our work as well, where, of course, there are types of information that if they got into the wrong hands, it could really undermine this work and even, put people's lives in danger. And so a lot of it has to be held quite close to the chest. Yeah. But we do work with different North Korean defectors, especially people who have left quite recently, or people who may have had, interesting experiences when they were still in North Korea or in the North Korean system, including people that were working in the IT sector, for instance, working with different people to create tailored content. And we can talk more about that if you want. And also technologies as well, technologies and tools, programs to try and help North Korean people to access more information, stay safer while they're doing that. And so there's quite a lot of development going into those kinds of tools and products.
Now, some might say that the almost complete lack of visible change inside North Korea, in fact, almost going into reverse, into complete isolation over the last 3.5 years because of COVID, is cause for loss of hope about the possibilities for change there. What do you say to that?
I understand that. I think that as activists working on this, we have to recognize that and we can't have blind faith or hope. But I still have hope, and a lot of the people that work on this issue have hope. And I do think that it takes a certain kind of long-term mindset and resilience to work on this issue, because people have been working on this issue for 20 plus years. And like you say, it's still such a difficult issue.
Yeah.
It can be very difficult to see, visible, change. There's not, been a visible protest movement in North Korea, for instance, or, visible, kind of clear political change in the direction that we would want, in a consistent way. It's often 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back, or even 2 steps back. But in the long term, I think that people who are able to have that long-term thinking, we do see that, yes, there are setbacks, but there's long-term positive sources of change and hope. This has been really challenged with the pandemic. The pandemic came out of nowhere for everybody, and it's had a really bad effect, especially on this issue. And we've really seen, I think, the limits of how bad things can get. But the pandemic conditions change, and even North Korea will come out of that, and it may be more difficult than before, but we just have to, then up our own efforts, up our own game, and be more creative, bring more support and effort to empowering North Korean people to push for change.
Yeah. Now, as well as helping North Korean refugees to tell their own stories, either in Korean or in English, you and your colleagues at Link are often cited, or you appear in international media like the BBC, CNN, and Reuters, and this here podcast. Why is that important?
That, I think, is, to be honest, a little bit less important than some of our other work. But nonetheless, there are a lot of journalists working on this issue and trying to, tell broader stories about North Korea, but it's been very difficult, and again, it's become even more difficult because because journalists don't have access to going into North Korea, even in the limited ways and times that they used to be able to. And so, and there's of course a rotation of the correspondents that come through Seoul as well, changing every 3 or 4 years.
Yep.
And so we have an opportunity to work with such journalists to introduce them to North Korean refugees themselves, maybe introduce them to, broader range of story ideas, and then work with people to try and actually make that happen so that international audiences, they hear different stories about North Korea, again, not just missiles and politics of Kim Jong Un. So I think that it's less important that I myself am in the media, but when there are opportunities to have more North Korean voices in the media and people are able to learn about North Korea more holistically as a country, the challenges that North Korean people face, but also the positive changes and sources of hope that North Korean people are generating as well. I think that that's more important on the international media side.
Now, in June, the BBC published an extensive report on North Korea using text messages that were brought out of North Korea through complicated means about famine and food shortages in that country. And you commented on these interviews with North Koreans that a devastating tragedy is unfolding in the country. Can you say more about that? So is the food situation worse than it was before the pandemic, for example?
Yeah, this project was quite a long-term project, and I think it's important to note that it was looking at conditions during the pandemic, not, at the time that it was published. This is a long-term project, getting information over a longer period and getting information from people about what were their lives like during the pandemic. So not necessarily in 2023, but, people are also talking about the most difficult times during the pandemic, which may have been in 2021, 2022. Just a little bit more of a longer term thing. I think that some people got a little bit confused about that maybe. And it definitely chimes with the other information that we were able to get from different sources, and also, people doing great work at organizations like Daily NK and Asia Press. Reports of resumption of famine and people dying from the severe shortages of not just food, but medicine as well. And so an increasing vulnerability there. We would hope that the worst of that has already passed and that people are coming out. But that, along with everything else that made North Korean lives more difficult during the pandemic, has been a really major concern And again, it's happened at a time when it's become even more difficult to know more fully and more importantly to help North Koreans inside the country. And even, like I mentioned, North Korean refugees on the outside to know what's happening to their family and to help people. So there has really been a double, triple whammy. Again, hopefully the worst is behind us on that. But I think this was reflected in the BBC piece a bit, but I think that in the long term, it'll be really interesting to learn more about what this period has been like for North Korean people, and not just how hard it has been, but what North Korean people have thought about this period. That's maybe the more important thing. I think that when we have more access to, North Koreans who have lived through this period and then escape and are able to tell us about it, how are people interpreting these conditions, this hardship, and the North Korean government's role in that hardship? Did they see it as justified? Did it increase discontent? I think there's some early evidence that maybe for some people, this did contribute to a declining loyalty to Kim Jong Un and the North Korean government. Yeah. And so that kind of, public sentiment change that we often maybe don't think about enough in North Korea because there's so little information about it. I think that will be one of the really interesting things to look at. And these kind of, BBC, journalism pieces, they are kind of the first draft of history for those kind of things. We'll continue to have to update our knowledge and understanding of those things as we get more information.
Okay. Last thing I want to ask you about, Link has, according to your annual report last year, 22,537 allies. What is an ally? What do they do? And does Link need more?
Thank you for setting that up. Yeah, so Allies is a new initiative that we launched at the end of last year. Like you said, we've already got more than 20,000 allies in, I think, more than 80 countries around the world. And this is really part of our effort to, again, kind of counteract the massive focus on North Korea as a security and political issue, and show not just people around the world, but also hopefully, North Koreans who are still in the North Korean system, ultimately North Koreans who are still in North Korea as well, that they have support from people around the world. There are allies of North Korean people that see North Korean people as different to these other security and political issues. And we're also trying to kind of build that identity along with the movement as well, so that we can mobilize people to effectively support, whether it be through donations to ourselves or even other great organizations that are doing work on this issue, or trying to build that to political leverage so that we can influence government policies on this issue, increase the number of NGOs that are working on this issue. We need basically more support for North Korean people and for that to be public and known, because historically this has been such an under-supported issue. And so if people are interested in checking that out, they can go to withthenorthkoreanpeople.org and
withthenorthkoreanpeople.org.
With northkoreanpeople.org, we have information on this initiative, and people can sign the Allies Pledge, which we wrote with North Korean defectors as well. A lot of this has come from North Korean defectors, by the way, in terms of the value of it. And in fact, I almost forgot about that, but part of the origin for this is our refugee work itself. When North Korean refugees are coming through, and, before the pandemic, when we were meeting a significant number of people in Southeast Asia, when they were able to, reach more safety at that point, we would do orientations and we would provide information and so on. Partially, we would tell them who we were, because we can't really share a lot of information when people are coming through China. And we would share support from people around the world. We had videos of supporters, talking about why they supported the North Korean people, their solidarity, their allyship. And this was really powerful for so many North Korean refugees who had reached that point. And we want to be able to spread that to more North Koreans around the world and spread this idea that there is this movement, and to undermine the North Korean government's narratives and ideologies about the outside world as a threat and all of those kind of things. This has been advocated for really strongly by North Koreans who we consult with, who we work with, that it could be a really powerful kind of soft power tool if we're able to get this to as many North Korean people as possible as well.
So that's withthenorthkoreanpeople.org. Also Liberty in Korea at libertyinnorthkorea.org, and find you on the various social medias for people who want to help and get involved.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you again, Sokeel Park, MBE. I hope you come back on the podcast again before another 5 years go by, and definitely before you get your OBE or knighthood.
Hey, one of those things will happen first.
Yeah, inevitably one will. Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
Thanks very much, Sokeel.
All right. Cheers.
Let me ask you this. You're listening to the NK News podcast, so you know more about North Korea than most. But how about the South? To really understand what's happening on the peninsula, you need to know about South Korea. And now you can, through our new Korea Pro news and analysis service. This is not your average news service. It's a thoroughly researched analysis of South Korea's politics, society, and economy from an international perspective. But you know what the cherry on top is? The absolute lack of commercial influences. No ads, no sponsored articles. It's just pure, objective analysis by a team of qualified specialists. And the best part? As a listener of this podcast, you get a 25% discount. All you have to do is use the coupon code PODCAST during your sign-up. So head over to koreapro.org/podcast and start your journey with Korea Pro. That's koreapro.org/podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our podcast episode for today. Our thanks go to Brian Betts and Alannah Hill for facilitating this episode, and to our post-recording producer genius Gabby Magnuson, who cuts out all the extraneous noises, awkward silences, bodily functions, and fixes the audio levels. Thank you, and listen again next time.